This is BBC 5 Live.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the programme. 6 minutes past 2. We're here till 4 o'clock. A conventional time, a conventional duration, with Mark sort of just chipping in every now and again with some thoughts about films that he's seen.
What's this chipping in business?
Just chipping in every now and again. As
What happened to co-presenting?
Chief Chipperinnerer is what you are. We're not on the live video stream today, which is a shame because I made a special effort.
Why aren't we?
Well, it's being used for Sport Relief 5 Live-A-Side challenge, which just sound like an oral freshener. Anyway, it's more of which in a moment. But as a special treat, we are planning to put together a fully visualised edit of the show online, so you can look out for that. So you can't live stream us because you can watch the 5 Live-A-Side. But we'll be putting together an edited version of our loveliness a little bit later on.
Our loveliness.
Who's this? This is Zach.
Wasn't that an Alice Sebold novel?
What?
Our loveliness. Never mind.
I'm sure it could well have been. Anyway, but you know when you ask me a question, the answer for me is always no or no idea.
No idea.
And what are the movies you're going to be looking at later?
We shall be looking at Pacific Rim Uprising. We shall be looking at Unsane. We shall be looking at, A Wrinkle in Time with our special guest,
Ava DuVernay.
And we have already looked at Annihilation in our special podcast feature, Cream of the Streams.
I know, I'm not sure about that title. Anyway.
So, because Annihilation is a Netflix release, and so we decided that we should review it because it's Garland Films, very interesting. So we've already done that. So if you want to hear the review of Annihilation in our new feature, Simon, what's it called?
Cream of the Streams.
Cream of the Streams. That will be on the podcast, which will be available almost instantaneously that the programme is finished.
Zach Reynolds says, medium-term listener, second email from across the pond, anyway, in New York. If you recall, my father is Daniel Reinhold, a professor of Jewish philosophy and fan of Puppet Master Robin the Editor. So this is going back. Quite a while. I just wanted to contribute to the discussion of the code of conduct on planes, which came up last week, as I would like to add a violation to the list. Now, this is so great. This is like from your worst aviation nightmare. Okay, so this is definitely going to get included. I don't think I even have to ask you, Mark. It's just going to get nodded through. Okay. I think a new code of conduct for aeroplane watching is essential after this extraordinary story from Zach.
This is for watching films on a plane.
Yes.
Okay.
On a recent flight to the States from Tel Aviv, my sister and I found ourselves sat next to a couple with their baby. Of course, we braced ourselves for disturbances to our film viewings. However, the baby was very well behaved. The father, on the other hand, not so much. Halfway through the eternal 12-hour flight, this man proceeded to pull out a recorder before his friend in the row in front pulled out his guitar.
What?
Surely not. Surely they would not dare interrupt my second viewing of Dunkirk.
This is a Helen Reddy moment.
With an in-flight concert.
Fantastic.
Well, they did.
did.
I glanced at my sister, who already had a horrified look on her face. Who do they think they are, playing instruments on a plane? Well, despite my Wittertainy training to sit quietly and mutter complaints to myself, I plucked up the courage to put an end to it. Of course, I couldn't do it myself. I asked an air hostess to do it for me.
A cabin crew.
Apparently, I'm just quoting Zach's. These are Zach's words. It's not for me to edit.
Okay, I'm
Zach.
Just saying.
Anyway, big what's up to my dad and happy birthday to me, because you'll be reading this on my birthday. Anyway, tinkety-tonk and down with noisy passengers. This is clearly not acceptable. You cannot take musical instruments. You can't start playing musical instruments on a plane.
Here we go. What? Can you get from that letter to The Exorcist in 2 jumps?
Is it something to do with playing the recorder?
No. I've already given you half the detail.
No.
Helen Reddy. Can you get from that email to The Exorcist in 2 jumps via Helen Reddy?
Still no.
Okay. The most famous instance of playing music on a plane is in Airport 75, in which Linda Blair, star of The Exorcist, plays a young girl in urgent need of surgery.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And Helen Reddy plays the singing nun who whips out a guitar and starts singing to Linda Blair, and the sequence became infamous when it was parodied in Airplane. That. There we go. From that email to The Exorcist in 2, all roads lead to the Big E.
But let's just get this absolutely clear.
Yeah, that's just...
Singing, no. playing
the
music?
guitar?
Absolutely
No.
What did you think you were doing?
What were they playing? Do we know?
I'm afraid we don't know. It must have been. I mean, the
It wasn't
problem is,
Uptown Funk.
with a recorder. I mean, that's just going to drive people crazy.
But what's amazing is that the cabin crew hadn't stepped in immediately and said, "I'm very sorry, but you can't." And the guitar had gone on as hand luggage.
It must be hand luggage, but fancy
A very small guitar or very big hands.
So someone was either planning to play it on the plane all the time, or it was so valuable they didn't want to try, because there are many.
Because that's possible.
Many
you can book a seat for your cello.
Yeah. Well, and there are lots of stories of baggage handlers not actually baggage handling musical instruments with enough care.
I know a story of a rockabilly band who went to play in America and took their double bass with them, and they put it into the hold, and when it came out the other end, it was, in the words of my good friend Tim Polecat, firewood.
Was it the Polecats then?
It wasn't the Polecats, no, it was another band.
Sam in Edinburgh, I'm writing on the issue.
The Polecats' double bass was indestructible because it was full of foam.
Wit at diplomacy. When I heard the email that you read out on last week's programme from a listener driving across Central Asia, I was dismayed to learn that the Church has yet to bring the great state of Tajikistan into the fold. I say this as in a few weeks' time I'm going to be moving to Tajikistan for 4 months to study. My first reaction was one of panic. What kind of place is this that sees no need for 2 weekly hours of film-related witterings? I shudder to think of the code infringements no doubt going on unpunished. Should I even go at all? Anyway, I soon realised that this presents an enormous opportunity, not so much a nation in rejection of the way, but instead a nation of 8.735 million future church members. With some aggressive proselytisation, I'm confident I can get most of them on board. So this is a missionary in the making. I was wondering, therefore, may I be named official wit ambassador to Tajikistan? Although I understand the podcast and your show and all involved earn enormous amounts of money from your various ventures, I'd be willing to take this position free of charge. All I ask is that my measly short-term listener status be upgraded early to medium-term. Well, we'll do that, and it is obviously an unpaid role. But if you would like to be the wit ambassador to Tajikistan, consider, and there's a uniform that obviously goes with that.
Is there a badge?
Consider yourself enrolled.
Can I just say, on the subject of badges, I did a thing at the British Film Institute on Monday with Paddy Considine, who's got a film coming out next week, and he gave me this. Do you know what this is?
It looks like a devil.
It's a Pazuzu badge, because Paddy Considine is more of an exorcist bore than I am.
Oh, good heavens. I knew there was a reason why he hadn't been on for
Do you know what Paddy Considine gave me for my 50th birthday?
A punch in the face? Because he's a boxer in this film.
Okay. Sorry, it sounded unnecessarily aggressive, but then you contextualised it.
It came out that way.
It did come out like that.
What
yeah,
I meant, I'm trying to plug this film.
Yeah, fine. But it just came out like you were threatening me. No, he gave me a face mould of Linda Blair, which was a copy of the mould that they had used to make the dummy face for The Exorcist.
Wow.
How many people would give you that as a present?
Fortunately, very few, I would say. By the way, the aggression that came out in that ad-lib was... I was channeling the Donald Trump tweet when he was talking about former vice presidents. Anyway, shall we do the box office?
Nicely done.
At number 11...
Other presidents are available.
Mary Magdalene. Peter Freeman says, just heard your review of Mary Magdalene, which... timed the first Life of Brian moment at about 20 minutes in. To me, the correct timing is during the opening sequence when, after the caption, Palestine AD 33, I was waiting for the Saturday afternoon about tea time.
For tea time, okay. I thought you were going to say I was waiting for It's Just a Model.
Not a good film, I thought, with Jesus being represented as a Guardian reading motivational speaker. No edge to it at all. If it wasn't for the unmissable quality of Rooney Mara, whatever she says or does on screen, I would have been out way before the end. The Reverend Kevin Fear, or Rev Kev.
Kevin Fear?
Fear, yes, exactly that. Just Rev
That's
Kev.
a really good name.
I have no idea who the film Mary Magdalene is aimed at. As fairly committed Christians, it was okay. Hang on, how can you be a fairly... He's the Reverend Kevin Fear. Okay. As fairly committed Christians, it was okay that there was little backstory and that fairly important details were not shown, such as what happened to Jesus at his trial. However, some scenes that were shown also missed really important details. I like the idea of developing the story of both Mary and Judas, but I found the character of Jesus as charismatic as a wet Friday. Joaquin Phoenix may be a good actor, but not on the evidence of this film. However, we thought Rooney Mara played her role well. As there was no attention to backstory, this film will be a difficult watch for non-Christians who will be totally baffled about who was who, and why on earth anyone would drop everything to follow the character of the man portrayed in the film, who will forever in my mind now be a Guardian reading motivational speaker, whatever they're like. Oh, actually, I know a couple now, come to think about it. Another Reverend Dr. Michael Ward. There is a good film to be made about Mary, the Magdalene, which is the correct name, but this is not it. Aside from the mumbled dialogue, the permanent frown on Jesus of California... Actually, he's from Puerto Rico, but never mind. The overbearing orchestra, the pervasive gloom and darkness that made me think we were in Iceland in December, and the condescending chapter headings, e.g. The Road to Jerusalem. There was the political ending so thick and cement-like it belonged to a bricklayer and not a filmmaker. The film may have had its moments. If so, I missed them. Still, the drummer enjoyed himself. If you want to be theologically challenged, I recommend Jesus of Montreal. What a brilliant film that is.
It is. That is a really genuinely brilliant
Or
film.
even The Last Temptation of Christ for its take on Lazarus. If you want to see Galilee in daylight, try Pasolini's The Gospel According to St. Matthew. I particularly recommend...
The Gospel According to Matthew. I'm sorry, but we need to do this.
No, we don't.
Il Secondo Vangelo Matteo. The Saint Matthew is an anglicisation. In its original version, it's the Gospel According to Matthew, and it's important.
I particularly recommend the goats in Pasolini's film because they did not mumble and you could see them. As for Mary Magdalene, to quote those great theologians from Monty Python, this is not a wine to be drunk, this is a wine for laying down and
avoiding.
Feel free to edit this email. The movie makers sadly didn't do the same. From the Reverend Dr. Michael Ward, 5 degrees, but who's counting?
That's very good.
I think you are, Michael.
That's very good. Shall I...
Mary Magdalene, is it? So that's.
I mean, I those emails are really interesting. Two things. Firstly, I would very much like to see what Helen Edmondson's original screenplay was. As far as I understand, she wrote the original screenplay, and then the screenplay was rewritten by a second writer. So I'd very much like to see what Helen Edmondson did with it originally. The second thing is, I kept thinking all the time I'm watching it, I'm really interested in this story. Why am I so uninterested, in the film? Why is it not engaging me? One of the problems is certainly that Joaquin Phoenix is a Guardian reading motivational speaker, which is bizarre because in the same time you have in cinemas Joaquin Phoenix with same beard and hair arrangement being completely charismatic in You Were Never Really Here, the Lynn Ramsey movie, which for my money is the best film in UK cinemas at the moment. I also have to say that I think Rooney Mara never gave you the sense of, anguish and commitment that part really needed. And the most important thing is, it's interesting mentioning the Pasolini because the Pasolini is fascinating. The Pasolini is a film with, dirt and grit under its fingernails. It's a film about real people in real circumstances. I also think that in the wake of The Passion of the Christ, no matter what you think of how mad that film may be in certain ways, how much it's a full-on horror movie, it is a film which kind of changed the landscape of what a biblical drama could look like. And I think that Mary Magdalene suffers from a bunch of people speaking English in slightly non-specific accents and looking like, that Jesus of California thing, which as you say, you corrected. And all of these things comes back to, yes, see Jesus of Montreal. It's a more interesting film.
We started at 11. At 10, My Generation, which is this Michael Caine film.
Yeah, which I haven't seen, which I'm going to see this weekend. Can I very quickly mention that at number 12, because we skipped over it, is The Square, which is the Ruben Östlund film, which is this kind of art world satire, which I thought was really interesting. It won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a very odd, very strange film with a very, very disturbing performance art sequence about 2/3 of the way through. Is worth seeing if you liked Force Majeure, which is the film that he made before.
And you reviewed it last week.
I did, and I liked it.
Number 9 is Finding Your Feet.
Much funnier than the poster suggests, although I noticed that the new poster has now superseded the old poster. We're no longer just given those faces of the grinning cast on the side of buses. There is now a new poster which is much funnier and much better.
Shape of Water is at 8.
One of my favourite films of the year, or last year, because it won the Oscar for Best Picture this year. It kind of came out last year. Guillermo del Toro at his very best. Guillermo del Toro, as you know, made Pacific Rim, and he is a director who is so talented. He's able to make robots hitting monsters into something exciting. We have the sequel to that coming up in the show. Will they manage to repeat that trick?
Ladybird, Jason Mohamed's favourite from earlier.
Yeah, and a really good choice. A really well-made film. Because of what it is, it looks deceptively easy because it's a kind of coming-of-age drama that is told with a real levity of touch. it looks easier than it is. I think Greta Gerwig has done a terrific job with it. It's not her directorial debut, it's her solo directorial debut. She did co-direct a film about 10 years ago, but she wrote and directed this. I think she's done it brilliantly, and Saoirse Ronan is terrific in the lead role. But when is Saoirse Ronan anything but terrific?
Game Night is this week's number 6.
Much funnier than I'd expected. Yes, it's a mashup of The Game and Date Night, but frankly, it's a much better film than you would think from those two sources.
Red Sparrow at number 5.
Still dividing audiences around the country. I know 2 teenagers who went to see it, and both of whom came out of it being rather surprised by the nastier elements and wrong-footed by them, because the fact is it sort of sells itself
if they
as a mainstream. If only they, yeah. And when was that likely to happen, Simon?
Okay, that's very true. Now, number 4 is Greatest Showman. So here's Richard from High Wycombe. I took my wife and 8-year-old daughter to see The Greatest Showman last Sunday morning. I came out feeling manipulated and hoodwinked.
Yes.
And I loved everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go.
The Greatest Showman is the musical version of a Richard Curtis movie. Unrealistic, unreal, but fabulous. We all watch Love Actually over and over again because it's warm-hearted, not because it's a realistic portrayal of life. I hardly think Theresa May dances to Jump for My Love every afternoon in 10 Downing Street, and yet I happily watch Hugh Grant doing that over and over again with delight. The Greatest Showman manipulates your heart with circus tricks of thumping songs, magical dancing, and a feel-good message of family and love.
Can I say something very quickly?
Well,
I'll be quick. We just came back from America through Heathrow Airport, and as I was coming through Heathrow, there was a whole bunch of people embracing, and I said, "Love is," and Professor Lady Her indoors went, "Actually, all around."
Okay, didn't actually need the vibrations of the desk, which had just sent 1,000 people to turn down the volume. But
What, as opposed to us talking?
That's true. But at least we're mellow. Black Panther's at number 3.
Really liked it, really enjoyed it. Thought the whole evocation of the Kingdom of Wakanda was terrifically well done. It was a film that managed to have real fun with its story, but also to pack an emotional punch. Thought the cast were great. Thought it was really well directed. It's like, okay, great. We've kind of up the ante. This is what we now expect from our superhero movies. Let's keep it at this level.
So Tomb Raider is at number 2. Julian Evans, age 42 3/4. I thought I'd drop you a line with my thoughts on the new Tomb Raider movie, which I saw on Sunday with my 11-year-old daughter Megan. I first went to see Tomb Raider in 2001. I can't remember much of it and didn't feel the need to see the second one. However, if they made a sequel to this Alicia Vikander version, I shall definitely go and see it. The 2018 version was enjoyable and entertaining, with most aspects of the film pitched perfectly, not too long, not too silly, nor too serious, good action scenes, tension when required, enough plot and backstory to hold the attention throughout. The performances were believable. Alicia Vikander was excellent, very well supported by the rest of the cast. As the father of an 11-year-old girl who prefers action movies to, in quotes, girls' films, I thought it was brilliant to see another strong female role model. Vikander's Lara also got properly sweaty and grimy without the magic makeup and dirt-resistant skin of the otherwise equally excellent Wonder Woman. Megan said that a couple of moments were a bit scary, but she enjoyed it despite them. The boy next to us, who was about 6, yes, I thought that too, Mark, didn't seem at all bothered by the frightening bits. As Megan has never seen any of the Tomb Raider computer games, I did have to explain the final scene to her. All in all, I really liked it. Bring on the next one. Sergei says, I saw Tomb Raider over the weekend. It's not too bad a way of spending a couple of hours. I can believe in the roly, stabby, fally and the living dead in the film, because that's what the film's all about. But what really jarred me is the final scene. In line with your other correspondents who have a gripe over petty things in films, I take irrational exception to the scene in the pawn shop, this is PAWN obviously, where our protagonists spot a gun display out the back. This is supposed to be London, and there is no way a pawn shop would ever deal in handguns. They are illegal, after all. I know that Lara Croft is synonymous with her twin guns, but this was such a rubbish way to introduce them. Couldn't she just have found them in her dad's secret room? Tomb Raider is at number 2.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting email. I hadn't that point hadn't occurred to me, but thank you for bringing it up. I think Alicia Vikander is terrific, and she is really the film's strongest suit. I thought the Angelina Jolie Tomb Raider movies were rubbish. They were everything that was wrong with computer game to big screen adaptations. That said, I interviewed Angelina Jolie once, and I said, I didn't get those films at all, and she said, no, but that's fine. But I have spoken to loads and loads of young girls, young women who have found those films very empowering, and that's entirely possible. Obviously, they weren't aimed at me. In the case of this, because I like Alicia Vikander, I think she's a really smart actress, and it's a very physical role, and she takes it on very well. I mean, the fact that I came out of it thinking it was all right is a big deal. I don't think it's any more than all right, but I thought it was all right, and that is a really big deal considering how negatively I responded to the previous Tomb Raider movies.
Kevin Donnelly caught an early evening showing of Tomb Raider last night, accompanied by my 15-year-old son. We both emerged very happy with Raw Uthaug?
I'm assuming so.
Raw Uthaug's take on the rebooted game franchise. A lot of effort was taken to please the gaming fans. No new ground was broken in terms of archaeology, adventuring, and so on. Let's face it, Indiana Jones was doing all this 30 years ago.
It does want to be an Indiana Jones movie, which it isn't.
The script was clunky in places.
Yep, in many places.
But the action was often genuinely exhilarating. All credit, though, to Raw for managing to not even slightly sexually objectify Lara. Imagine how this film would have turned out in the hands of Michael Bay.
Yeah.
Real credit must go to Alicia Vikander, who gave us a genuinely young, fresh and dynamic Lara, a proper origin story, and a marked contrast to Angelina Jolie's version, which I never took to.
Very good. I agree with that.
And number one is The Irritating Rabbit.
Irritating Rabbit, as we are now officially calling it. It's rubbish.
It's a huge hit.
Well, that's as maybe. But, I've always said you cannot judge how good a film is on the strength of its box office. If you want to judge how good a film is, get people to pay on the way out. What I don't understand about Irritating Rabbit is why on earth would you take the legacy of the Beatrix Potters and then turn it into this? Why don't you just start from scratch and build a whole new film? Because this has nothing to do with any of the elements that are involved in the Potters. I know, we've all seen Disney do Winnie the Pooh. I know we've all seen Disney take loads and loads of text and completely change them. In fact, I'm a really big fan of Saving Mr. Banks, which is a movie about the way in which Disney took the Mary Poppins stories and turned them into something different, which I love. But in the case of this, there is just no connection between those books and this. So why don't you just have it for what it is? Call it Irritating Rabbit starring James Corden. And then at least we'd all know where we are.
Mark Lane in Waterloo.
Headache-inducingly poor film.
Earlier today I went to see Peter Rabbit, and while it's certainly inferior to the two Paddington films, I was still entertained. The film moved along at a bright and breezy pace, past the 6 laugh test. However, most impressive for me was the CGI work used for the animals, which was quite superb. Al Knapp says the film was quite good. I mean, not Paddington. Good.
Not Paddington in the same way as,
Certainly not the travesty envisaged. This was a case where a critic would have swayed me to stay away had we not pre-booked, and that would have been a mistake. The film was charming and we chuckled throughout. Yes, the EpiPen scene was misjudged, which we discussed last week, but then I don't believe rabbits should be taught to electrify door knockers either, and there were a few too many breaking the fourth wall moments and self-referencing voiceover bits for my liking, but the humour was far more wide-ranging than I'd expected, from slapstick to the existential. Neil says Beatrix Potter legacy ransacked by this film. Unsurprisingly, Corden is far and away the worst thing in it, but judging from the reaction of the junior members of the audience here in Boston, he's the funniest English export since Stan Laurel. I did laugh a couple of times. My daughter 8 liked it. She's a big fan of Home Alone and Tom and Jerry, to which this effort owes a large debt.
Well, that's completely right. I mean, it is Tom and Jerry, it is the Warner Brothers, it is Looney Tunes. That's the kind of slapstick that it's dealing with. And I don't have a problem with that. I think it doesn't do it very well, incidentally, but I don't have a problem with that. I mean, heaven's sake, I'm a fan of The Evil Dead. The Evil Dead is basically one of those cartoons, but it just happens to have blood and guts standing in for custard pies. It's the Three Stooges with gore. I don't think this does that very well, but even if you think it does, why drag Beatrix Potter into it?
Neil also says it's not quite as bad as Postman Pat the movie, which is in our house the gold standard against all bad films are judged. One more, Hilary Seabrook. Myself and him indoors attended a late afternoon screening, so shared the experience with a number of under 5s plus parents. All were surprisingly code compliant. We both thought the script was absolutely awful, without any appeal for the target audience, no clever jokes for the accompanying adults. It did not raise a single smile, though the slapstick visuals passed the 6 laugh test. The Blackberry scene left me aghast, even though I knew it was coming. The only saving grace was that the rabbits were adorable, even with James Corden voicing Peter. One small child was sobbing his heart out at the end. Whether this was in disappointment, we shall never know. This movie promised so much and could have been so much. What an opportunity wasted. Hilary, thank you very much for the email. Coming up, we're going to discuss Wrinkle in Time.
Well, the first thing to say, I think she's a terrific filmmaker. I really liked Selma. I think David Yellow came on the programme to talk about that. 13th was really great. That was another one of those cases that we've been talking recently about Netflix, about...
That's a fantastic film.
A really, really great film. And there was a problem about it not being able to be shown in more theatres because Netflix wanted it to be on TV. I know for a fact of at least one theatre in Bristol that was trying to show it because they'd shown DuVernay's. Incidentally, when I saw the film, I saw it in America, and at the beginning of it, there was a little introductory film, and she said, "Hello, I'm Ava DuVernay." Okay. And I know that we've always said DuVernay, but I believe that she says DuVernay, tomato.
Exactly.
But obviously,
Let's see what happens.
It's her name, okay? So here's the thing. I have always said that I would rather a film aimed high and tripped than played it safe. And I think that A Wrinkle in Time is a perfect example of that. I have to say from the outset that as much as I think that the movie that she talked about there sounds absolutely brilliant, that it didn't work for me, and I would be lying if I said it did. There are things that I really like about it. It's very hard not to applaud the fact that it exists. She talked about having a person of color as the lead role. She talked about that wonderful moment that you brought up about when a young girl says to a boy, "Do you trust me?" And he says yes, and she said that's the moment around which I wanted to build the drama. And she also talked very passionately about the idea about loving those films, but feeling that the film didn't love her back because she hadn't seen herself represented on screen. And all of those are things that they are important. They are important because it is to do with things changing. You talked about whether it's a trend or an anomaly. Yeah. I think we are in a point when the world is changing. That also means that each movie has to carry, unfortunately, a huge weight with it, which is not fair. I mean, I think, movies need to be judged on their own, and it's not that every single one of them has to work. In the case of this, I think it's best described for me as an honourable failure, and it reminded me very much of Peter Jackson's version of The Lovely Bones, which was a film in which all the intentions were good. It was a film, incidentally, which Lynn Ramsey was trying to do for ages in a certain way, and then it didn't happen, and then Peter Jackson took it on, and I saw the film, and I thought, that doesn't work. It's not capturing for me what the book managed to do. And in fact, it was interesting because DuVernay talked about when she was talking about what the book was about it being about, quantum physics and love and all these different things. People saying the thing is unfilmable. And she said, well, I don't think it is unfilmable, but I think it's a challenge. My own feeling is what the film has demonstrated is that it may well be unfilmable, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't attempt the challenge. The problem for me is this. Yes, there are thematically everything about it is stuff that I like. I like the fantasy. I like the time travel. I even like that kind of central conceit about the vibrations of love. I love the casting, and I think it's well put together. What it never managed to do, however, and what's crucial for me for fantasy, is to completely engulfed me in that world. I spent the whole movie feeling that I was watching it and not experiencing it. Now, I know that it's possible to say, okay, well, the film is, DuVernay said in that interview, very specifically aimed at the 7 to 14.
She called it a children's film.
I know she did, which is a very brave thing to do, incidentally, because even when people make children's films, they always do that. Well, it's for everybody. And in fact, it is true that when you look at the classic science fiction fantasy movies, like, for example, E.T., those are movies that will play to a young audience and will also play to an old audience, and they sort of transcend those age boundaries. It is very unusual for somebody to say very specifically, this is what I'm aiming at. And it may be, therefore, that as a 56-year-old British bloke, that I'm not in the right target audience. I don't know that entirely explains it, however, because I have seen other films in which I have managed to be engaged in the central world. What I felt all the way through was, I'm looking at this, there is extraordinary stuff going on screen. There is, there are wondrous sights. There are, it's a story with, huge potential and scope. But what I never felt was, I am engaged in it. I am involved in it. I am being pulled. I always felt that I was one remove from it, that I was watching it. And the problem with that is, and this is very much like what happened with Lovely Bones, is that when you start watching from that distance, when you start not being emotionally swept up in it, when you start not being swept along by the narrative, you stand back and then you start to see all the things that are wrong. Now, it is true that, one of my favourite science fiction films of all time is Silent Running, a film which makes no sense whatsoever Why is there gravity on the outside of the spaceship? How come he didn't notice that it's to do with the sun? Why are the geodesic domes having to do all those questions? But I don't care. And the reason I don't care is because the film wraps me in its spell and takes me on that journey and puts me in those geodesic domes, and I don't care that it doesn't make any sense. In the case of this, I found myself caring much too much about quantum entanglement and love, and I found myself all the time just being full of questions rather than answers, and therefore being frustrated. I think that having heard that interview, I am willing to go back and give it a second go, because maybe when I went into it the first time, I expected something that was aiming for a broader audience, something that would speak, more specifically to an old man like me, as opposed to a young audience at whom it is so clearly aimed. But the fact of the matter is, I do think that it is an honourable failure, that it is attempting to do things which are interesting and adventurous and are to be applauded. But from a dramatic point of view, and as somebody who is a fan of the fantasy genre, it didn't capture my attention. It didn't sweep me off my feet. It didn't make me fly. It made me sit there thinking, why am I not flying with this? Why am I not getting past that initial, why am I not making that leap of faith?
At the screening that I went to, there were some 12 and 13-year-old girls had been brought in by ITV for the Lorraine programme.
Okay.
And so I hung
and
around,
they loved it?
And they were being interviewed afterwards, and I hung around to listen to what they were saying, aware, as I was, as you were, that, this is not the demographic.
Yeah.
And they were thrilled. And now it may well be they were thrilled because they were being on television and they were meeting Wayne Kelly. But they were using words like empowerment and all this kind of stuff. And I think they thought Storm Reid was amazing.
Then great. And
so I'm agreeing with you. I'm just stepping back and thinking, a bit like a Jacqueline Wilson book, which is targeted at 8 to 12-year-old girls quite specifically, that maybe this is the cinematic equivalent, without stepping back at all from any of the criticism. So,
okay, I'm, an inch, but I'd be lying if I said it worked for me, because it didn't.
What might you be doing in the next?
I might definitely be doing Pacific Rim and Uprising, and I might definitely be doing Unsane, and I might definitely be doing Third Murder in Holland.
85058 mayo@bbc.co.uk. And if you get the podcast, which will be available towards the end of the show, you'll also get our brand new feature, which is what it seems to be called Cream of the Streams, but I am struggling with that just a little bit, because there's a whole new type of film which is going to Netflix and other streaming services, but usually it's a Netflix film. And Annihilation is up there. Lots of people want to talk about it, so we have talked about it, and that's
on the podcast.
On the podcast, on the smallest hill on which you will die, which has been a recurring theme for a while now. Jodie in Bristol, Mark and Simon, I am a linguist.
Here we go.
In the Dark Knight,
call Susie Dent.
A character has half his face disfigured, rendering him unable to close his lips on that side of the mouth.
And yet,
he shouldn't be able to pronounce
the letter P.
Bilabial oral stops, the B and the P sound. And I couldn't watch that. I couldn't watch that scene. So it's not it is being a P, but what you need to say is, you shouldn't be able to produce bilabial oral stops, a man in your condition.
A man in your condition.
Steve, aged 40. I enjoy.
If only Batman had said that. What are you doing, man in your condition, fighting a superhero?
I enjoy your occasional item, the smallest hill to die on. Having studied computers and worked with them for about 20 years, the thing that makes me tingle with anger is the way they're portrayed in the movies. I'll give you 2 or 1-0 if you prefer, if you want binary. When they infect the alien mothership with a virus at the end of Independence Day, magically the virus they developed is able to talk to the alien ship's computer system.
Yeah.
What are the odds of the invading aliens running the same operating system as Jeff Goldblum?
Exactly.
The same technology, even being similar enough in design to become infected. Slim, no, very slim, no, really, really, really very slim. Now we're getting close. Nonsense. But maybe an example of what you're talking about before. You're either along for the ride or you're not.
I mean, all I was thinking was, hang about a minute, what is it? Is it a USB? Is it a SCART lead?
Whenever SCART lead, ask your grandparents. Whenever something is displayed on a computer screen, there is a beep or a clicking noise as the characters are displayed on the screen. This never, ever happens in real life. Never has, never will. Ever, nowhere. Computer monitors do not make a noise as things are displayed. It would be pointless and really, really annoying. Stop it. It's silly.
Have you seen Stand By Me?
Yes, of course.
At the end of Stand By Me, when Richard Dreyfuss finishes writing the story, he doesn't save. He just turns the computer off. And I know now we have autosave, but back then,
That was a
in the
terrible
ancient, it's what?
That would have caused horror.
Honestly, like the whole cinema went, didn't save, floppy disk, back it up.
Just before we finish on A Wrinkle in Time, I think that having sat through the film and thought, it sort of troubled me for a while that even though everything that you said was pretty much right and what I agree with,
Thank you.
if I had kids who are 8 to 12,
You'd take them to see it?
I would definitely take
them to see it?
because even though it has all those things that are wrong with it, it is in capital letters a good thing, and they might take something away from it, and all it's. I don't know. I was struck by these kids who watched the film, who took away from it more than I did. So it might be another Greatest Showman. Thinking, well, maybe it'll find. I also think it's even though there's a 40-foot Oprah which doesn't work.
I also think it's interesting that there's a whole army of nitwits on the internet. The kind of people who use
really,
yeah,
I hadn't noticed.
Who use phrases like SJW, Social Justice Warrior. Who literally
What's that they say?
SJW. Oh, you're just interested in the, So somebody says, oh, you only like that because of the politics. Somebody who literally hears no music and has no appreciation of the fact that it is perfectly possible to admire something which is an admirable failure. It is really weird. I think that if anything absolutely epitomizes the debasement of internet culture, it is the inability of a certain group of people to just simply hear no music and not understand that it is possible to applaud something which doesn't work.
Yes. Very good. Anyway, that debate will continue, and I'd be interested to know what you make of A Wrinkle in Time when you see it and what your kids make of it and the conversations that you have afterwards. 11 minutes past 3. This is 5 Live. You can email mayo@bbc.co.uk. You can text 85058. You can't watch the live stream because there's 5 Live-a-side going on, which does sound like it's a crime, which could be prosecuted. But anyway, we'll talk to Caroline a bit more about that in a moment. But there's another Pacific Rim.
Pacific Rim Uprising. So the first Pacific Rim movie I thought was, something of a treat. Is a movie made by somebody who appeared to be delighted to have been given, umpty millions of dollars to go away and make a huge movie about massive robots hitting giant kaiju. Guillermo del Toro has always said that he used to do, one for me, one for them. But even the ones that he did for them were personal. And the real key to that is the Hellboy movies. So whilst Guillermo was making, The Devil's Backbone, which is brilliant, and Pan's Labyrinth, which is brilliant, he'd make the Hellboy movies. But the Hellboy movies felt every bit as personal as some of the other films did. And when Pacific Rim happened, you did feel that sort of that love that he has for the enormity of the monsters, that love he has for the Japanese tradition of monster movies. You felt that it was made by somebody who really was passionate about this. I remember him talking about his worries about the 3D, because he was never a 3D fan, and the problem of miniaturization that happens with 3D, and how you can, when the whole point about Pacific Rim is that these things are big enough to stand up in the sea. They are really, really huge. You have to watch the thing and go, that's big. So now along comes, I think he achieved that instantly. So now along comes a sequel which takes place 10 years after Battle of the Breach. John Boyega is Jake Pentecost, son of Stacker Pentecost, formerly a pilot, now somebody who is involved in the black market, selling Jaeger parts, Jaegers being the robots that people drive, and they need two people to drive them because they're so big. He's arrested by the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps and given a choice: either go to prison and do time, or rejoin the PDDC as an instructor, where he finds very quickly that it's impossible to be anonymous.
How you doing, Nate?
It's Ranger Lambert.
Are you having a laugh?
Well, this is a military base. You remember how that works? Ranger Pentecost. And you must be a Maranamani.
Yes, sir. Ranger, sir.
Well, let's get you squared away. Oh, and try not to steal anything while you're here.
Did that haircut just call you Pentecost? As in badass stacker Pentecost? Pilot of Coyote Tango, hero of basically the whole world?
It's just a name.
Yeah, really cool name.
And that pretty much is
I enjoyed that, though.
Did you? Okay, fine. So what then happens is stuff starts again. Action,
Stuff?
Yeah, general stuff starts again. The that character, one of the things that they do is to bolt together, a new Jaeger from old bits of robotics. And during the course of the movie, what happens is that we have new robots, we have big robots, we have lashed together robots, we have drones, we have internecine squabbles, we have people turning on each other in strange ways, all that kind of stuff that I'm kind of interested in. But what we also get is that complete lack of emotional engagement or plot engagement or I actually care about this stuff engagement. One of the things that was interesting about the first film was that sense of scale was breathtaking. One of the things that's not interesting about the second film is that the sense of scale is really very boring. If you saw Godzilla, the new Godzilla, when you saw the thing with the halo dropping, and you really got a sense of the enormousness of it. There is none of that here. If you saw Kong Skull Island, there was a certain degree of, witty invention in that. I know not everybody liked that film as much as I did, but there we go. If you saw Real Steel, which was the robots hitting each other movie that turned out to be really, really good fun.
I love that film.
Yeah, so did I, okay? There is none of that. What you get here instead is the big beasties being directed by somebody who brilliantly does not have the pornographic sensibility of Michael Bay, so that's great. So we're not in Transformers territory, but equally doesn't have the magical sensibility of somebody like Guillermo del Toro that is needed to bring you into the story. So when you finally get large things storming around, smashing the sides off huge buildings, creating, chaos inconceivable, it doesn't matter. It doesn't feel like anything. It doesn't have any impact. I was reminded watching it of Ben Wheatley made a film called Free Fire, which did not do well at the box office, despite the fact I loved it, but just goes to show critics don't know anything. This movie will do much better at the box office than Free Fire did. And Ben Wheatley said this interesting thing. He said the reason he made Free Fire was that he had seen so many films in which really massive destruction happened, and it didn't feel like anything. It felt like, it's the Batman versus Superman. It's all that some just enormous destruction, but I don't feel anything. So he made a movie in which people get hit on the back of the knuckles with a wrench, or somebody gets danged on the head by a falling flower pot. The kind of thing that you can feel, the kind of thing that you can wince from, the stuff that has some kind of engagement. In the case of Pacific Rim, it just felt very, very much like lumpen, dirgy, perfectly well executed, but absolutely unengaging and frankly boring stuff happening. And the surprise for me was that because of the affection I felt for the first one, and because I think John Boyega is terrific, he's been terrific in everything from Attack the Block, which I know I was never a huge fan of Attack the Block, although it evidently was a brilliant piece of casting, and it's probably a film that I need to revisit, actually, because I was probably unfair to it. Or maybe I wasn't. I don't know. I have to watch it again. From that to Star Wars, he's very, very charismatic, very, very charismatic screen presence, so brilliant in Detroit. That doesn't come, they need to get some production credit here as well. That doesn't come through on film at all. What you get here is literally just a bunch of big things going stomp, stomp, crash, bang, stomp, crash, bang, stomp. And at no point did you get that thing which I got with Pacific Rim, the original, which was the moment when you go, and you need to have that. I mean, we were talking before about the way in which fantasy film needs to, you need to not watch it. You need to be engaged in it. You need to be swept away in it. It needs to take you out of the here and now and put you into something else. It needs to put you right there in the middle of that suit that will then, drive the robot punch. It didn't. I just spent the whole film thinking, bash, crash, stomp, stomp, boom, bang. Is it finished yet?
Boom, bang, a bang.
Boom, bang, a bang, boom, bang, a bang.
Tom
Shorter and punchier.
Tom Goodfellow.
Go on.
In Sydney. Dear Jaeger and Kaiju, I had a free afternoon, so I thought I'd take my 10-year-old son Barnaby to watch the big dumb action movie about our hero going to the Pacific to save the world whilst resolving their issues with their dad, played by that bloke from The Wire. Not Tomb Raider, that was last week. I'm talking about the new Pacific Rim
That's
film.
That's very funny.
Which I rather enjoyed, despite it being as dumb as a sack of rocks.
Okay.
It is more witty and charming than any movie featuring two gigantic robots headbutting each other has any right to be, largely thanks to the relaxed performance of John Boyega, refreshingly using his own accent. Unlike certain robot-based action franchises I could mention, the Pacific Rim films show some respect both for their characters and, more importantly, the audience. I expect that both Barnaby and I will be in the queue at the local Megaplex when instalment 3 comes around. Tom, thanks for the email. It's 19 minutes past 3.
This is basically, it's called Unsane, and it is a film over which the shadow of Shot Corridor, which was this sort of, 60s exploitation film, hangs, this sample of it hangs enormously. It's basically an increasingly paranoid psycho chiller from Steven Soderbergh, who you remember at one point sort of stopped making movies and then decided that he didn't want to stop making movies, so he came back. I believe Elton John has got a retirement tour that's going to last
3
for
years.
the next 3 years, after which he'll come back and the Eagles are playing together again, right at one point, so, all that sort of stuff. So anyway, Claire Foy is Soy Valentini. She is a career woman who has endured a stalker in her life. And at the very beginning, the tone of the film seems sort of fairly serious. Her normal life has been horribly disrupted by the fact that she has had a stalker. She's got used to moving towns. She has got used to keeping her phone and her ID secret. She has got used to, changing her daily patterns. This is all stuff which has become normal because of this appalling influence that this stalker has had upon her. Understandably, she has become somebody who is depressed and anxious and slightly paranoid because of what's happened in her life. So she goes to see her doctor, who is based in a hospital, and she mentions in passing that she has felt suicidal, but she says it in a very, very offhand way, and a kind of, why on earth would I want to go on with this? She's asked to sign a form, which she's told is standard. The next thing, she finds that she has committed herself without knowing that she was doing it for observation, and suddenly has gone to being essentially imprisoned, albeit nominally for what's meant to be a short time, in a place where she had no intention of staying at all. Here's a clip.
Look, you're just doing your job, and you've been so considerate of my feelings and my well-being. And you're right. I signed those papers. I'm here by my own volition. It's for my own good. Can I ask, do you think I could just make a phone call just to let my family know that I'm okay? Let them know where I am?
You got a phone call? That's allowed.
Oh, you're so nice.
You're saying you want your phone call now?
Yes. Yes, that is what I'm saying. Oh my God, it's like you read my mind. Yes, hi, my name is Sawyer Valentini. I am at Highland Creek Behavioral Health Facility. I am being held here against my will. Please, send help. Thank you. I'll be out of here in like 20 minutes.
Do you know how many calls the cops get like that every week?
Those are from crazy people.
And that's the setup. Those are from crazy people, but she is now...
Is that Her Majesty the Queen?
That is Her Majesty, her M, the Q. And of course, once she's inside, she suddenly starts to think that one of the staff is actually the person who has been stalking her. And when we see them, that appears to be the case, but obviously we're seeing through her eyes. So is it or isn't it? Is she actually cracking up, or is she completely as sane as she says she is? Meanwhile, everything she tries to do to demonstrate that she's sane actually just makes her look, in the eyes of the institution, all the more unhinged, or unsane as the title of the film, added to by the fact that the film is shot in this very, very kind of, I mentioned Sam Fuller's Shot Corridor, this way in which everything about all the angles and everything says, hey, we're descending into the mouth of madness, we're in this institution in which everything is cracked and everything is crazy and everything. So it's very, very overcranked. And the strange thing about it is, firstly, on the subject of the iPhone 7 thing, when you say that if you shoot a film on an iPhone, immediately what you think is therefore it's got kind of grungy feeling, but that's not the case. I mean, if you saw Tangerine, in which they used that anamorphic lens, Tangerine looked beautiful. I mean, I know an awful lot.
Remind me what an anamorphic lens is.
So an anamorphic lens is the thing which takes a wide frame, like a 235, what we think of as widescreen, proper widescreen, and it squishes the image, and it So if you've ever seen an unrectified, actually this is something that won't work anymore. It used to be on old televisions, on old square televisions, that when they got to the credits of a Western, suddenly the image would squish up so that you could read the writing, but everyone looked tall and thin. Yep. That is an unrectified anamorphic image. And a rectified anamorphic image, so it squishes it to get it onto the camera, and then it unsqueezes it during projection. And there was a lens that was developed that they used for Tangerine to make a widescreen image from a mobile phone. It didn't look grungy. It just looked like somehow they'd managed to shoot unbelievably unobtrusively. In the case of this, it doesn't look grungy, and Steven Soderbergh himself said, the quote was, "It's one of the most liberating experiences I've ever had as a filmmaker." He said he wasn't doing it as an aesthetic decision to say, hey, I'm shooting this film on a phone, although he's done this in a much more boxy ratio. He's saying, I did it because it was the tool that was available that made it able to make the thing, and it was thoroughly liberating. And oddly enough, the film has a kind of gloss that totally belies those utilitarian origins. We also have some very good performances. I mean, Claire Foy, I think we all know, is a top draw performer and absolutely carries this with a straight face. The more crazy the drama gets, the more you're brought into it through her character. We have Juno Temple, who's this kind of blade-wielding fellow inmate. Juno Temple, I think, is a force of nature. I think there has yet to be a Juno Temple film in which in which she hasn't managed to do something interesting and exciting, whether or not the film is great or whether or not the film is trash. She always manages to give it 110%. I mean, she was so brilliant in Killer Joe. She was so brilliant in Kaboom. She's a real sort of anarchic force of nature, which is exactly what this film requires. That said, the plot makes no sense whatsoever. This is now the third film of the week in which the plot makes no sense whatsoever. And it's kind of hard to know at one point. When the film starts, it seems to have a sort of serious note to it. And then as it descends into this sort of spiral of madness, as it goes into the mouth of madness, as it were, it becomes more and more overcooked, more and more overheated, closer and closer to the exploitation origins of a film like Shot Corridor, or, I like Shot Corridor. I like The Ninth Configuration, which is a film which is pretty much based on Shot Corridor. But you remember with Side Effects, there was that weird thing with Side Effects, that Side Effects started...
I don't know, remind me.
Well, it was a film that started out looking like it was a serious drama, and then suddenly turned into something that was completely out of control. And one of the things I like about Soderbergh is that you never quite know how straight he's going to play something, because he is somebody who does have a love of cinema in all its different forms. He can do movies that are dramas, he can do movies that have got sort of trash sensibility, he can do movies that are, sort of production line, Ocean's movies, he can do all these different things. In the case of this, as the film gets more and more unhinged, as it becomes more and more unsane, to quote the title of the movie, it also makes less and less sense and becomes... At times, it's like watching a big screen episode of The Twilight Zone on steroids, and it's both as good and bad as that sounds. I have to say, the honest truth of it is all over the shop, and I don't think it'll lose very much in not being seen in the cinema if you see it at home. But Claire Foy holds it together, because Claire Foy manages to keep an absolutely dead straight face even as the film itself descends into total bonkersness.
So 3:38, TV movie of the week.
I think we've already covered this, but let's...
So what is it?
Well, we decided, whilst we were in the middle of the thing, that the TV movie of the week is Real Steel.
First of all, it's like giving the football results before the actual match.
It is.
Matt Dixon, Guardians for me, step change forwards for superhero films by looking backwards and pilfering from the best adventure B movies.
Yes.
Marvel haven't looked back, and DC films have never caught up. Peter Williams...
prepare for trolling attack.
Oh, well, they don't know who Matt is, do they? Peter Williams...
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. It's got to be the Pirates for me. This is not Pirates. This is the Pirates. Frequently hilarious, eminently quotable, beautifully animated, and a cracking soundtrack. 10-pole Tudor, anyone? Loved in my house from ages 2 to 42. Rochelle Ruby.
Can I just say, on the subject of 10-pole Tudor, the funniest thing in Julian Temple's Great Rock and Roll Swindle is the thing with Irene Handel referring to him as Mr. Tadpole.
Very good. Rochelle Rudy, Starship Troopers, because who doesn't love Space Marines? Plus Neil Patrick Harris as a space Nazi. Mark will pick Brief Encounter because he's a classy gentleman.
I am a classy gentleman, but not classy enough.
Vivian Johnson, Mark the old softie, will go for The Theory of Everything in reverence and respect for Stephen Hawking. However, Starship Troopers is more fun. Greg Shepard, Starship Troopers, a satirical sci-fi blockbuster about the insidious and callous nature of fascism that is often misunderstood because it's a film that never directly nods to the audience or takes its tongue out of its cheek. And Laura Brenchley, I'll have to go for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, but my 11-year-old, Marvel-obsessed son has just looked through the list and shouted Guardians of the Galaxy at me. So I'm guessing that's his choice. Not a bad choice either.
What can I just say on the subject of Starship Troopers, which you and I loved, and which was the Radio 1 Christmas movie of the week?
Came out on Boxing Day, and it was like the perfectly timed because it was away with all that festive nonsense.
Yes,
Let's go kill a bug in space.
There's a brilliant interview with Paul Verhoeven in which Paul Verhoeven was asked, did the studio not have any problems with the film sort of its fascist invocations, because that's what it's and he said it was unbelievable. He said we were literally there on set with people wearing those uniforms and those flags everywhere, and he said and literally not one of the studio heads noticed.
Wow. That doesn't fill you with inspiration, does it?
It doesn't.
And Laura Brenchley finishes off by saying, I think, we're going to choose Bill and Ted. It's a wonderful piece of goofiness, and it's Quantum Baby.
Yeah, it is Quantum Baby. And I do love Bill and Ted, and did a show at the BFI the other day in which we played because there's a BFI Bergman season, and one of the films that they put back out into cinemas is Seventh Seal, which I think is a wonderful get from Seventh Seal to The Exorcist in one move.
I can't really
Max von Sydow, thank you very much. And but rather than playing the clip of Max von Sydow playing chess with death on the beach, I had Bill and Ted playing Battleship with death in Bogus Cheddar, which is just 3 out of 5.
TV movie of the week is
Real Steel, because we decided that when we were reviewing Pacific Rim Uprising, that if you want to see a movie in which two robots headbutting each other is more fun than you had any right to imagine, Real Steel with huge action.
And when can I see that?
I'm so sorry. You can see that on Sunday on BBC Two at 5 p.m.
Perfect.
It is perfect Sunday afternoon viewing.
It's that or Songs of Praise?
Yes. Be that then.
Okay, so TV movie of the week, So Bad It's Bad. Choice cuts this week include Anaconda, Get Smart. It's not very good, it's not very original, it's all over the place. I wonder about Anne Hathaway's career path. The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, Johnny English Reborn, and perhaps the clear favourite, The Wicker Man from 2006.
The Neil LaBute remake of The Wicker Man, the film that nobody ever wanted, although I choose this. Firstly, it is terrible. Not the bees, not the bees. It is a film which, even in the Nick Cage catalogue, I was talking to Edward Woodward once, and Edward Woodward hadn't seen the remake, but he met Nick Cage, and he said, "Oh yeah, I heard you starred in the remake of The Wicker Man," and Nick Cage said, "Yeah, you got some great reviews." It is a film of unbelievable stupidity, and at the point that they were signing off on it, when I was making a Wicker Man documentary about the original Wicker Man, the writer of the original Wicker Man said, "I've just had this fax in. There's a director called Neil LaBute. Do you know him?" I went, "Oh yeah, he's great. That's a really smart idea. Neil LaBute's take on the Wicker Man, that I would pay to see." Fast forward a few years, yikes, amundo. Beyond terrible. Not the bees! Not the bees!
I haven't even got to what other people think, because you just mentioned The Wicker Man for 2006 and you're off. Maria Waters, I still remember the day my mum told me she preferred The Wicker Man remake to the original.
No, she didn't.
I had never even realised I was adopted. Anyway. Adam Gulliver, it takes a special kind of terrible to make a martial arts fight between Jet Li and Michelle Yeoh boring, but somehow The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor manages it, a truly awful movie. But anyway, the TV movie of the week, So Bad It's Bad, is going to be the remake.
The remake of The Wicker Man.
All right, very good.
And for which I feel partially responsible.
Yes.
This was so long ago, it was in the age of faxes.
Good heavens. Yes, you really didn't need. You don't need to make a sound effect for every kind of dated reference that we come up with.
Why? Simon Paul made a thing with the sound of dial-up.
And we move on now to our next film, which is
Mark Felt, the man who brought down the White House.
Terrible name.
Exactly.
Let's move on.
It already wins super ungainly.
Awful. Tell me that again.
Mark Felt, the man who brought down the White House.
Dreadful.
Okay, so the story of the FBI lifer who famously admitted to being Deep Throat later on, who was, of course, the informer who gave the information to Woodward and Bernstein that enabled them to write the extraordinary news stories that eventually led to the downfall of Nixon. So Liam Neeson is Mark Felt, who's working at the FBI when Hoover dies. He's passed over for the top job in favour of a man who he thinks is basically a Nixon stooge. Meanwhile, the Watergate inquiry, which is unfolding around them, finds itself unaccountably stifled from the top. Here's a clip.
No more interviews with White House or CIA people without permission.
What? Whose permission? Give us a minute. Get out. The FBI is an independent body.
I'm aware of that.
Are you also aware that means we don't need permission to do anything from anybody? You give that up just one time, you don't ever get it back. Ever.
Let's not get dramatic. We don't even know what this is.
That's right. We don't. But we're going to find out. That's what we do. You don't work for them. You're the director of the FBI now.
Does he have a gun and a baguette ready and just shoot everybody?
He says, I will find you and I will leak about you.
Exactly.
So essentially here you have a historical drama about something which happened in the early 1970s. And the story basically has a president who is, a liar and a charlatan, who is involved in criminal activity, someone who acts without regard to the law, who clearly considers himself to be above the law, someone who finds himself on the wrong side of an FBI investigation, and who starts hiring people who he's hiring clearly to serve his own ends rather than to serve the best ends of the nation, who's somebody who makes an enemy of the press, who actually become the people who are really the window into the awful truth that is happening, somebody revealing the true venality of the tenure of this president, someone who ends up finally leaving the White House in disgrace after having had all the disgraceful stuff about his presidency revealed through the press, who have stood up valiantly against this wall of silence. So it's a historical movie, and as you know, I mean, I'm a bit of a Nixon bore, and I will watch anything that's to do with Watergate. That said, the film itself is a bit of a fudge. From what I've read, there was a lot more in the original cut of Diane Lane's character. So she plays Audrey Felt, Mark Felt's wife. And there is a strange sort of subplot in it, which is to do with their estrangement from their daughter and the search for the daughter, who's somebody who was very, in a very different political world to the world of her father. And you get that it's in the movie, but it seems almost to have been bolted on afterwards. I mean, of course, one of the things that the film has to do is ask why this happened. The question is, why would you be the person who is responsible for these leaks? The suggestion that maybe you're slighted for being passed over the job. I mean, yes, a Democrat, but also somebody who, later on was convicted of, acts against people suspected of being members of the Weather Underground that violated their civil rights. So somebody who was, absolutely on that tough law enforcement, beyond the realms of the law itself. Neeson is a little bit wiggy, and doing that kind of the gravelly voice thing. And there are a couple of scenes in car parks that reminded me of how much more I'd rather be watching All the President's Men, which, as I've said before, is a film which really meant a lot to me, not just because of the subject matter, but also because my dad sneaked me into it when it was a AA certificate film, because he felt that it was something that I ought to have seen. So the film, I think, dramatically is a little bit here and there, despite the fact that it's telling a story with, which obviously would have its claws in me immediately. But isn't it interesting that very much like The Post, we've got a film about the Nixon administration and about what happened with the Nixon administration and about the way the Nixon administration conducted itself, a film about something which happened in the past that somehow, for reasons I struggle to exactly put my finger on, seems to strike a terribly contemporary note. I don't know why.
No.
I just feel it in my waters.
What I want to know is, Who was driving the train that I could have driven through your theatrical pause in that monologue earlier? That's all I was wondering. It's an unanswerable question, of course. Give me the name of that film one more time.
That film is called, brilliantly, Mark Felt, the Man Who Brought Down the White House.
And that was what Mark felt. About Mark Felt.
Mark Felt story.
Come up with a better title. I
know.
Ludicrous.
Well, I mean, also, when you think about all the films we've seen that have got titles that are just, I mean, Unsane, right? Unsane, it tells you what it does and it does it.
I like that title.
You like that title, okay? I mean, actually, I really like the title A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah, it's also from the book. From
No, I know, but
it's
it's a brilliant title, right? Because
yeah.
Mark Felt, the Man Who Brought Down the White House is also a title of a book as well. So, although it's the kind of thing that you would, sort of feel more about like that. So, anyway.
So it's 10 minutes to 4 o'clock. So I'm struggling to think what the movie of the week is going to be because everything has been so caveated. I'm not quite sure where we're going to go.
Been so caveated?
Yes, you've been caveating everything, on the one hand, but anyway. So maybe we haven't heard it yet. What else?
Okay, so Third Murder, which is this kind of very haunting legal thriller from Hirokazu Koreeda, who made I Wish and Like Father, Like Son and Our Little Sister, films which I've reviewed here in the show and which I've been a very big fan of. The film is a twisty and atmospheric legal thriller, which is the story. Which at the beginning we have a guy who is a lawyer who is tasked with defending a client who is facing the death penalty for an alleged murder to which he has admitted, to which he has confessed. He is somebody who has previous in this area. He is somebody who has, there are reasons to believe that he might well have been a murderer, and indeed he himself says that he is. What the film is then about is this kind of strange game of cat and mouse between the lawyer and the defendant. And it's a film which plays with our expectations and lets its surprises unravel in a very slow, strangely melancholic, strangely atmospheric way. On one level, it's a film about the death penalty and what that means. On another level, it's a film about the blurred lines between the law and criminality. That line, about the law can be a very, very blunt object. And it's sort of about that as well. And there is a lot of discussion in it about how much a lawyer must believe what they say in order to be credible, how much a lawyer must simply do what is legally best for their client, and how much this particular lawyer is or isn't being manipulated by somebody whose story seems to change on a weekly, if not daily, if not hourly basis. It's a really interesting sort of twisty drama. There is a key motif that recurs in it, in which our central character, the lawyer, is seen talking to the defendant through a glass partition. And as their faces are reflected in the partition, the faces are melded together. Because whenever you see this reminds me of that brilliant moment in Manhunter, which I still think is the definitive Hannibal Lecter movie, when our central character is looking out into the cityscape and he puts his hand on the window. And this is a gesture that you see repeated time and time again in these kind of movies which talk about that strange duality between dark and light, between cops and criminals, between lawyers and their clients.
Well, it's Professor Brian Cox, and he's looking at the universe, so that's obviously...
I hadn't even thought about that, but that is an interesting point thrown, particularly since it ties back, and I know this is what you were thinking, to earlier on when I was talking about Alex Garland and I was talking about Sunshine, and of course the technical advisor on Sunshine was...
Brian Cox, the actor.
Professor Brian Cox.
Him.
That's right.
Exactly right.
Exactly. So that's why you were saying it. You were saying, so when you said that was the joke, I've got it. I'm so sorry. I actually just took you at your word when you said Professor Brian Cox, and I thought you hadn't even noticed that that's what you were saying.
No, it was a joke.
Fine. Should we do it again? Let's do it again. So anyway, that bit, Brian Cox isn't in this scene. So that bit when he's looking out the window and he puts his hand on the thing, it's a thing that we see time and time again.
Yeah, well, it's Professor Brian Cox, isn't it? And obviously, so that works with the universe and so on.
Very good.
Thanks very much.
Moving on. Anyway, so I liked it very much. It's kind of haunting and
this might be movie of the
memorable
week.
And
this may well be movie of the week.
Yeah, honestly, I just say it says something about our relationship that when I'm talking about a Brian Cox movie and you say Professor Brian Cox, I just take you at face value.
Yeah, I don't know what it says, but it's Certainly says something.
Anyway, but so the point is that it's a film which all the way through plays with your expectations of whether or not what you're being told is true, whether or not what you're being told. I mean, it goes into some very dark areas. It has subplots and, which go off into very, very sort of strange and murky territory. But all the time it does it with this sort of strange sheen, this kind of oddly melancholy, which is actually, I have to say, greatly aided by the score, which has got this sort of strange, heartbreaking, tinkling quality to it, which I like from it. So anyway, it's called A Third Murder, and it is out on Friday, as indeed is Gholam, which is the...
What's that?
Gholam, Gholam.
So it looks a bit like Gollum.
Yes, but that's why I specifically said Gholam. And in fact, I know this for a fact because I interviewed the director, and I was calling it Gollum before, and she said Gholam, and I said, I'm sorry, because my pronunciation, as anyone who listens to this show knows, my pronunciation of words is generally terrible. Even So
tell us about
Gholam. So it's the debut feature from Mitra Tabrizian, who is a photographer and filmmaker, and it is set amid the migrant Iranian community in London in 2011, and it is inspired by a series of photos that Mitra Tabrizian took in 2005, exhibited in 2006, which were called Border, which were basically photographs of people who had come to the UK and appeared to be displaced from their immediate surroundings. So they were captured in a way that made them look like they were here but not here, that they were in one place but in another place. And this is a central idea that is carried on into the movie. Our central character, played by Shahab Husseini, who's a really brilliant screen presence, is a minicab driver by night. He works in a car repair shop by day. He keeps himself very much to himself. He is a man of few words. And of course, one of the brilliant things about this performance is that it's a performance that tells you what you need to know about the character, not through words, but through gestures. By daytime, he eats in his uncle's cafe, where there is an unspoken estrangement. There's a lovely bit of business that goes on that after he's eaten, he always tries to pay for the meal. And they say, no, this is your family. He says, no, I insist on paying. And this is something which goes on all the way through, this sort of strange tension between I want to pay, no, you can't pay, I want to pay, you can't pay. He has a young relative who sort of seems very idealistic, who raps about being willing to die for his people. This is this kind of recurrent rap thing, but has never actually lived anywhere near a war zone and hasn't experienced any conflict firsthand. Our central character, however, has, as we discover when he's recognised by two men who recognise him as somebody that they thought had disappeared, somebody they thought was a ghost, somebody they thought had just disappeared from the battlefield, who they remember as being a hero, and who they then want to get involved in a mission which is very, very sort of vaguely hinted at. I mean, one of the things I like about this film is it's a film which is deliberately elliptical, in the same way as Lynn Ramsey's movie You Were Never Really Here, which does a great job of not telling you everything about the plot, of just assuming that you can make those leaps, those connections yourself through visual connections. So all this is going on, and his whole thing is that he's disconnected. He doesn't want to be connected. He's not he doesn't have any illusions about modern politics. He's escaping from the past. He doesn't seem to have a clear vision of the future. He is living in a limbo, in a kind of crepuscular world. He is, in some ways, a ghost walking through this world. And then he meets a woman with whom he has no connection other than a chance encounter. And somehow, through this chance encounter, he starts to find a bond, he starts to find a connection, he starts to find something which appeared to have been lost and which refires a spark which had been absent before. The thing I really like about this film, firstly, it's very big on atmosphere, it's very big on suggestion, it's a film that tells its storytelling through its visuals, through a series of repetitive visuals, incidentally, which tell you about the way that the character is trapped. And it never feels the need to explain itself. It never feels the need to sit down and have long sections explaining it. Secondly, great performances. It's a movie that is very, very well cast. I mean, a photographer's eye involved in the casting, understanding that it's to do with the way that faces can tell stories rather than just dialogue can tell stories. I think it is a very impressive feature from Mitra Tabrizian, who I think in the future, with greater resources and will produce really, really significant work. So I think it's a debut feature which you will have to look out for. It's got a very small opening, and hopefully it will play in other cinemas around the country. But I was very, very struck by it. I knew nothing about it before I watched it, and it is my
movie of the week.
Movie of the week.
You don't even have to. You can tell by the way you talk about it that that's going to be movie of the week. So thank you. And what's it called again?
Gholam.
Thank you very much.
Or as you said, Gollum.
Nice use of the word crepuscular, of course.
Thank you.
This has been a Something Else production for BBC Radio 5 Live. Next week, Good Friday, we're on at 1 p.m. Special guest Bryan Cranston and Steven Spielberg. Thank you. Boom.